Merry Christmas 2024. Maybe I better date some of these so you'll know kind of which time period we're in as we go along. Those of you that have enough interest to continue watching, and even those of you that maybe decide to take a break and come back and give it another go, you'll have a clue as to when I'm talking about. So 2024, this morning was a little different for me as far as Christmas morning goes. And I kind of chose to make it that way. I felt anyway, you've heard me talk about what goes on in the fourth watch. I think I've got a upload called The Fourth Watch. You kind of get an idea there if you want to go back and listen. But the fourth watch of the night is could really be called the wee hours of the morning. And I woke up, wouldn't you know, just like I have, like I was when I was a little kid, I guess, and Christmas. Which reminds me, I'll have to throw this one in. So I told you a little about my dad's house that he had to drag down and then dig a basement under it. Well, there was a point in time when some of us were at home and we made a little makeshift bed down there, even on the dirt floor, until my dad could finally pour a little cement in one corner of it, and then we had cement at least under the bed portion. But so this was back in the day, as you can tell. But I remembered laying down there wee hours of the night on Christmas Eve, listening carefully. You know, sometimes you catch a view of things when you're listening on Christmas Eve, or the sound of things. So I was listening, and lo and behold, first I should say I slept right below the kitchen, upstairs kitchen, and our bathroom was kind of off to the side. But so about the time I'm thinking that, hey, Santa should be coming along any time now, and I was awake listening. And then I hear these footsteps upstairs. And I got thinking, heaven's sakes, could that be Santa? And I listened, and I walked across what I thought was the kitchen floor, which I thought was a little strange because the Christmas trees and the socks and things were in the living room. No, right across the kitchen floor, it was a distinct step. The next thing I heard was a toilet flushing. And I thought I'd better not go upstairs right now and check, because I might catch Santa with his pants down, and that would be awful embarrassing. But I've often thought back and even teased later on in my life that, hey, when Santa comes to our house, he does more than just eat milk or drink the milk and eat the cookies. He makes himself right at home, which I thought was kind of a nice thought when you think about it. It means he feels at home at your place. Anyway, a little nonsense, I guess, but it's a memory, which you could maybe tell by now that I've tried to gear these towards memories. Some people would write an autobiography or do something different, I guess, but this is the vehicle I have chosen to record some of those things on, and I hope to make them worthwhile for everyone that wants to take the time to watch. Anyway, so last night it was Christmas Eve and the fourth watch, as I mentioned, and I woke up. Well, this time, again, which quite often happens when you wake up 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, I couldn't go back to sleep. And I kind of just let it happen, to see if, or time go by to see if I could fall back to sleep, and toss and turn a little bit on my pillow and find out that's not going to work. And by then, another hour's gone. Well, it was getting close to 6 o'clock. And it was even starting to lighten up a little bit outside. And I remembered that Christmas Eve was in full swing all over town, probably now that I live in the city. If it was like it was when we raised our kids, why Christmas morning started pretty early. And anyway, I had the thought, why don't you get up? Because my wife said last night she wasn't going to wake up very early at all. Told me what time to put breakfast in and where to heat what degrees to heat the oven to, and let me know she wasn't waking up very early. So I knew I had a little time to work with, and I had the thought, I wonder what it's like. So I got in my car. I decided to drive down off the hill where we lived and look around town. Didn't have much else to do that was interesting, and I'd never done that before on Christmas morning at that time of the day. So that's what I chose to do. And as soon as I opened the garage doors, I could see there was some fresh snow. Now, the first thought that came to my mind is my daughter Valerie would be very happy because she just lives for snow on Christmas. If she can't have snow, she'll settle for a little gloomy, wet weather or something like that. But she doesn't like sunshine for Christmas, which I've never really been able to figure out. But anyway, that's the way it is with her. And anyway, I got up, headed down off the hill, and it was a little slippery on the driveway going down, but I had to slowed it down real careful, and I didn't have to get out first and shovel snow. So I was on my way. And I didn't drive fast. I didn't have to. There was nobody behind me. In fact, there's very few people that were in front of me. I passed very few cars as I went down off the hill here where we live. And as I got down on the main road, I decided, well, heck, I'll just stay on this main road and drive clear through town, just see what it's like on Christmas Day, see if there's any businesses open. Just this time of the day, what happens. So I did. Decided to drive clear out to the north end of town, almost to the airport road. In fact, I did drive to the airport road. And even on the main road, I maybe passed 12 or 14 cars total. And, it's a fair stretch out there. But on the little neighborhood roads, there was hardly any cars moving, except for just a few on those main roads. And I tried to imagine. I told you I like to use my mind's eye because I don't know. Maybe that's something I developed when I was a kid. I told you I always wondered about things and had lots of questions. And sometimes when I use my mind's eye and close my eyes, I didn't close my eyes this time because I was driving, but that's a good thing too. So anyway, I started thinking about what was going on inside this house or that house, and I think I only passed one store that was open, that actually had cars in the front, employees inside doing something. And I always felt kind of bad for anybody that had to work that time of the day. On Christmas Day, most businesses tell you up front they're going to be closed that day. But of course, hospitals keep running, and there are other things that have to keep going. So people are attending to those, and I get that, and that's a blessing to all of us. And I hope that we can appreciate it. I've got some of the members of my family that work in the medical field, and it's a commendable field to work in, because you have to kind of sacrifice yourself to meet other people's needs. And in that way, at least if it's done with the proper spirit, I think it pleases the Lord to know that anybody would sacrifice for somebody else's pleasure when they would maybe sooner be having a little more pleasure of their own. Maybe they learn to have pleasure while they're working. I think they do. But I've always appreciated people in the medical field, and police officers, people that run the ambulances and fire trucks, those kinds of things, because they always have to sacrifice a little more than the rest of us do. I taught school for a lot of years, 33 years, and I never had to do that. In fact, the matter is, I got Christmas break just like the kids did, so I had quite a few days off around Christmas time. A lot more than most people do. So I've been blessed that way. And as I thought a little bit, the last time I talked, I think I labeled the upload Christ, Mary Christ More. And it pertained to a lot of it pertained to what my parents and Lorraine's parents and what they had kind of grown up with Christmas time. And I got thinking afterwards that I left out one of the biggest parts of our Christmas at our house through the years. And my children will attest to this, some more than others, because some were more involved in the process than others. But my wife, and this will give you a nature of the kind of woman that I married. But Christmas was always very special to her. One of the ways I knew it was because when it was time that now we got an artificial tree, and it's pretty. And I'm glad we kind of went that way. But in the first years of our life, an artificial tree was out of the question. We need the fresh smell of pine in the house. And we didn't have good big four-wheel drives with rugged tires to get around in if it happened to snow. So come about October, start looking around for a Christmas tree up in the hills when we were up there driving around hunting deer or whatever. You start to think, well, Christmas is going to be coming pretty soon. So back to my wife. You can tell this is going to be one of those Jim Blaine that I talked about. Mark Twain's Jim Blaine and his grandfather's ram moments. I get sidetracked, but she told me, because she wanted Christmas to be so right, she said, when you go up and get a Christmas tree, I'll tell you how to tell if you got one that's good enough. She says, first of all, it has to be even, and you have to walk around it. The branches have to be even. Then you take 10 steps backwards. Then you look at the tree, and if you can see any part of the trunk, just move on to the next tree, because that one's not good enough. Well, I challenge you to try to meet that standard. It's a pretty rough standard to meet. Trust me, I've exhausted myself in the mountains trying to find that kind of a tree, and I was kind of trained so she wouldn't have to send me back up. But if I didn't come home with that kind of a tree, it wasn't going to work. Of course, it had to be the right height and everything. And while I'm telling tree stories, let me back up one generation to my wife's mother. Her name was Noma Lee, and she was kind of the tree engineer. I'm not sure her husband was quite as accommodating as I tried to be. or didn't maybe work as hard at it, but he did, and he come back with some, and I mean they were all right, but not really kind of what she wanted. But my mother-in-law was a special lady too. And I guess that's where my wife got it, because if she wanted a nice tree, and if he didn't come back with one, she taught him to take a few limbs or come back with a second choice or whatever. But what she would do, and she'd do it herself, because nobody could do it quite like she wanted it done, but she'd figure out where the bare spot was on the tree, and then she'd get another tree and she'd get a drill, and she'd drill into that tree trunk and fix a hole, and she'd stick another branch off of another tree, or else some limbs that she had to trim off the one that she had because it was too long or whatever. But before she got done, she had a tree that met the standard, even if she had to make it herself. And I've often thought that maybe that's where my wife got this, had to be the right kind of tree idea. Now, in my house, it wasn't like that at all. As long as we had one the right height, so we could see the trunk all the way up the tree, and it worked just fine. We used to put, even in my wife's family, they'd put we used to call them tinfoil icicles, but they weren't tinfoil at all. They were made out of lead-based icicles. And of course, you know what lead does now. They outlaw all that stuff, and it gets in your system and kills you off, I guess. But anyway, back in those days, we'd do a lot of things that they've outlawed since. Lead icicles. You can't even find those for sale anymore. It was an old-fashioned way of decorating. We'd thread popcorn because you didn't have the fancy decorations. It's kind of fun. You ought to try it. Thread some popcorn. Enough popcorn that you can string it around the tree. And it kind of gives it a nice look, and I think an even better feel, because you know you kind of did it yourself. Kind of like my mother-in-law did with that tree, making the branches fit. And I've almost lost my train of thought. Okay, so I'm bringing the tree down and getting it ready, and I started talking about my wife and what kind of woman she is. So since I'm talking about Christmas traditions here, and I did last time a little bit too, I have to mention, and the kids would spout right up with this one, is, do you remember the bread Mom used to make that we delivered all over town? And it was true. Now today, she's 75 years old. Her hands are all crippled, and she doesn't make bread anymore. But back in the day when we had kids, she made lots of loaves of bread. And as the years wore by, she got arthritis. Back somewhere, I don't know, one of the kids have got a picture, or where it went, but we had a picture of her. Somebody had actually asked to have, she was making bread, to have her put her hands down there by the bread so that we could see what hands made the bread. And I remember looking at those pictures, and I knew her hands pretty well. They were arthritic, and I don't know if any of you have that, inherited it, or what. My mother-in-law had it, and it twisted her hands around. My wife had it. The joints on her fingers were all swollen, and they were red looking, and the top part of the finger, the part just beyond the joint where the nail is, that part of the finger started heading off in a different direction than the rest of the finger did. And I haven't had arthritis nearly like that. But what little I do have is quite painful. So how many loaves of bread did she make? I think the maximum was right around 40. I think I counted 42 one year. And most years it was a little less than that, but not a lot less. And if you've made bread, you understand that the homemade bread, and especially the way she would make it, because she had a good recipe. My mother made good bread, and she tried to make it that way too. She wanted to know how that bread was made, and she made just as good a bread, I think. The loaves were a little different shape because they each have their own way of doing things, but she would make those loaves of bread and cut them up, put them in the pans, bake them, and when they got done, she would put them in the freezer because she didn't want them to get old and stale. So she would start earlier in the month in December and start accumulating these baked loaves of bread in her cooking regimen, and we'd put a bow on them. And then on Christmas, not on Christmas Eve, but well, I think sometimes it actually may have happened, some of them on Christmas Eve, but we try to get a day or two jump on things. And the kids would, the one thing that I'm glad that we did is we got the kids to the point that they enjoyed the experience enough that they wanted to go. And I have to explain a little bit why. Because they wanted to go. We lived in a farming community, and sometimes you drive for 6-7 miles to get to a house. And other times, of course, they were closer. But, and we didn't make loaves of bread, or she didn't make loaves of bread for everybody. But she'd start making a list of the widows and the widowers. And then she'd start coming down the people that were older that maybe couldn't make their own bread. And she'd go down before she got finished with her list. Like I said, there might be somewhere near 40 loaves. Put a bow on it, and we'd head out in the car. And my wife would stay home that time because she had other things going on. She was still cooking other things that she wanted to be nice for Christmas. And I mentioned that the kids kept wanting to come back and do more. And maybe you wouldn't think that would be the case, but here's why. I'd pull up to the house. The kids would pick out the loaf of bread out of a box, and I can still see them in my mind's eye, opening the gate, trailing up the trail to the widower or the widower's house, knocking on their door to see if somebody would answer. I'd sit out in the car usually and look. And pretty soon, you'd see the door open. Old people don't get to the door quite as fast as other people. The door would open and you'd hear my kids say, "Merry Christmas." And they'd hand them that loaf of bread. And then the fun part started for my kids, because those older people would invite them into the house, and they would quite often sit them down and share something that they had that they wanted to give to the kids. Now, this increased every year because we did it so many years that people started to know that we were going to come. And bless their hearts, those older people, even though they can't do what they would like to do physically to get around, they still like to see the smile on the kid's face. So they would meet him at the door and bring him in, sit him down, and they'd give him, it depended. Sometimes it would be a donut, or sometimes it might even be an apple or a piece of candy or something. But it seemed to tickle the kids, because when they came out of the house, they would run to the car, usually, if it wasn't real slippery. They would run to the car and open it up and say, "Look what so-and-so gave us." And they were just so excited and just anxious to get on to the next house. Well, you can just imagine what it was like over a period of nights to do that to nearly 40 people. They weren't involved in all of them, because sometimes we'd deliver, maybe just on our own or whatever, if we'd happen to see somebody and we had some with us that we'd made bread for. But those kids seem to love the experience, and I know because they've told us that they retained that as one of their dearest memories of Christmas time in Lake Town, which is where we raised them. They remember that. They probably can't tell you what they got for Christmas morning. I'm sure they could name a few things, but probably the thing that they still have that is most dear is the memories. And when they start counting the memories, there are other memories, of course, too, surrounding Christmas. But I think they would place that bread delivery very near the top, because it worked. And it seems to be that that's what always works. And it worked for my wife, even though she had arthritic hands. She kept doing it, and she felt good about it. It pleased her when she finished the last loaves. It felt good to the kids. It felt good to the people they delivered to. It warmed my heart to no end. And there's just good come out of it. Well, that's the way you can tell if something is right. If there's good and warmth, friendliness, and the kind of Christ-like service that Christ would give himself if he were there, then it seems to warm. And it's actually quite a lesson that can be taken of that. Now, this morning when I was out driving around, I told you I went north past the airport road and then looped around and came back. And as I was driving back on a different road, I got thinking a little bit, isn't it amazing that over 2,000 years later, we are still commemorating Jesus Christ on his birth, on what we presume to be, anyway, what we celebrate is his birthday celebration. And what other, the store is locked up, employees get a day off. What other day is there in the whole year that's like that? What other day at 6 o'clock in the morning could I get in my car and drive through the town and see everything locked up and the parking lots empty, and know that everybody's home celebrating Christmas? Then I got thinking, that takes place in broad swaths of countries all over the world. What a powerful influence Jesus Christ had upon this planet and continues to have, to greater or lesser degrees in our life. if we lend ourselves to commemorating Christmas the way he would like us to. I think if we get all buzzed up about things that don't matter, we'll end up with a different feeling. I've seen it. I've experienced it myself. But if it's the other way around, there's a lot of warmth in the Christmas season. And I think it carries not just around the world, but it carries beyond Christmas Day through the rest of, hopefully through the days after that. And eventually maybe will get us to reflect upon his life and teachings and what he asked of us all year through, and you'll have that same warmth. It's one thing to have warmth and then move out into the cold and then to come back in and get warm again. You've all experienced that. But there's no need to move out into the cold. Stay where the warmth is. So I drove back in the south end of town this time. And by then I was kind of feeling, it kind of surprised me that I'd have the kind of thoughts and feelings that I had as I just drove around and thought, listened, and looked. There was one place as I was going out toward Hiram, went up a hill, and there was a highway patrolman that just ahead of me kind of pulled over and out into kind of a open spot on the other side of the road. I thought, well, he's probably pulling in there to, who knows, catch a speeder or whatever. Or just park the car so that it wasn't eating gas all the time while he was on duty. I went up into Hiram and turned around and came back. And I passed and saw him there. And I drove past him and got maybe a quarter mile or half a mile down the road. And I thought, there he is. He'd love to be home with his family, having a Christmas morning celebration like the rest of the world is. But he's on duty. Something told me to turn around. And I kind of brushed it off, thinking, well, I'm quite a ways past him now. And the roads were a little bit slippery here and there, at least wet. So I brushed it off. Lo and behold, the prompting came again. I started thinking, maybe there is something to this. Maybe there's a reason why I'm supposed to turn around. Anyway, I turned around and I went back up the hill. And when I saw where he was parked, I pulled over into the passing lane and eventually got over where he was parked and pulled up beside his car. The way people are these days, he probably thought, oh, I'm under attack or some, who knows what. But he didn't. He rolled down his window as I pulled up. And I just asked him, I said, I bet you'd sooner be home with your family. And I happen to have a $100 bill in my wallet, which I don't carry that often. But I said, if I gave you this $100 bill, would you accept it for me, please? For what you're doing here this morning? Do you know what his answer back was? I can't. And I said, I'd like you to. He says, I can't. Then it dawned on me that they probably had a policy. So I asked him, I said, is it a policy that you can't? And he shook his head, yes. And he said, we can't because people would consider it a bribe or think of it as a bribe. So I told him thank you for what he does. and wished him a Merry Christmas, and he wished me a Merry Christmas first even. And I turned around and headed down off the hill back towards home. And as I did so, I thought, well, hold on. I'm pretty sure I felt the Spirit say, turn around, and yet he wouldn't accept your money. Why did the Spirit tell you to turn around if that wasn't going to be the case? And I got thinking, because the Spirit knows it's not about the money. It's about the thought. It's about the feeling. It's about the exchange of Merry Christmas, more Christ. And we had that exchange, and then I left. And like I said, was coming home. Well, I don't know why, but I really felt kind of touched by the whole thing as I came down the road a little bit further. There was another store open. It was a Maverick store. They sell gas mostly. It's a convenience store. But I could see there were a few cars there, and the lights were on inside, and there were some employees. And I thought, well, they're in there working too. And it's Christmas morning. So I pulled in. I had a empty drink cup in the car, and I went over and filled it up. And bought a refill. Went to the cashier. And it just gives you an idea as to how the Spirit works, I guess, because it was working in me at that time. And I was feeling sad that people had to work when others were home with their families, and they'd probably like to be too. Anyway, when I bought my drink, I had some smaller bills in my wallet, about some $10 bills, and I asked the lady that was, well, first of all, I guess I'll tell this little addition too. There were 2 or 3 other people in line. I let all of them go ahead of me. I think that's something Christ would have done. And they seemed grateful to be able to be on their way a little earlier. And then when I paid for it, I said, how many people are working here? And she said, there's 3 of us. And I got 3 $10 bills. Again, it's not the money. I got 3 $10 bills out, and I said, would you just pass those on to your fellow employees and tell them that those of us that pass in and out and see you working recognize what you're giving up and acknowledge it at least. And I had another warm feeling. Well, I'm a little hesitant to tell you on here, and I've struggled with thoughts on this a little bit, because on the one hand, I want you to appreciate the event in enough detail that you'll understand how it happened, and that when good things happen, there's good feelings, so that you can take that from this YouTube channel when I do it and make it something that meaningful that maybe you can find a way to do in your own lives and get some of the same warmth. That's what I'm after. It's not just the warmth that I feel, it's projecting and dispersing that warmth to others and letting them know the way and give you some thoughts about how it happens. But at the same time, there's a scripture that I'm aware of. And one of these days I'm going to have a whole upload on this scripture. But what the scripture says is, don't let thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth. In other words, when you do something, don't go crowing about it. I've thought about that a lot as it pertains to this channel, because it's not that I want to crow. It's not that I want to say, look what I did. It's that I want to relate in enough detail the experience so that you might appreciate and have the opportunity to maybe apply some of it in a similar way and achieve the same growth that I felt like I achieved. So that little breakaway from my regular morning time on Christmas morning that maybe otherwise would have been wasted turned out to be very productive, I thought. At least it was to me. I had some good feelings, and I think I generated some good feelings to others. I kind of looked back as I was coming out of the Maverick store to that lady that I'd given those bills to, and she was already running off to the other employees to tell them. It's just weird how something that small can have an impact for good and create goodwill and good feelings. It can happen like that with all kinds of things. So as we go along with this, there's going to be times when you're going to say, there he goes again. He's starting to toot his own horn, let everybody know what he is. And that's just, I'm being misread if you're reading me that way. Because there's a whole ton of things that I'm not telling you. I'm just using some that I think will help in some way. And I think the Lord's okay with that. Because if we're just doing it to toot our own horn, and we're letting our left hand know what our right hand doeth, to be acknowledged of people, then that becomes the reason that we're doing it. And that's not the reason Jesus Christ would do it, is to be acknowledged. That's not his way at all. And I know that. There has been times when I've shared something that I've done, and the immediate feeling I had is I feel good up until the time that I share it. As soon as I share it, I have a bad feeling. Well, why would that be? Because I crossed over the line and did something out of what? Self-gratification rather than the gratification of that I wanted to pass on to other people or to the Savior himself by being an instrument in his hands. If it's for self-gratification so that you can be seen by others and get acknowledgement and praise, that's not a good way to go. But it's hard in this particular YouTube project to know where that fine line is. So I'll probably continue to pray about it. And I think if the Lord wants me to, he'll prompt me that way. And if he doesn't, he won't. And I've learned to rely on him. But if you think about, well, why is it that he doesn't want that self-gratification to be the motivation? If the good gets done, isn't that what matters to him? And the answer to that is no. It's not the good that gets done, even though it might make other people happy. His concern with you is that you develop a relationship with him. Well, if you do it for other people's praise, you're not doing it for him. You're doing it for praise of others, not for the relationship that he wants to build with you. And I think that's maybe why I feel bad if I share something like that sometimes. Because what I had by way of relationship is lost in that process. So I'm going to be real careful, but at the same time, I can't very well talk about my life without going into detail about some things. So I hope you won't have negative feelings when I do that, and accusatory kinds of feelings, because it very much weighs on my mind that I will be misread, and the intent of what I'm doing these for will be lost. So I guess what I'm saying is cut me a little slack. Give me a break. I need it occasionally because, yes, I make mistakes, but I'm usually quite focused and purposeful in what I do. And my purpose isn't to be acknowledged by any means. All right, well, our time has run out again together, and it's amazing each time how the time seems to slip by. But Christmas is a joyful season. I want to just mention again my wife feeling, I guess other women are like this too, especially women, but things at Christmas time just need to be, in her mind, just right. Quote, just right. And when I've seen in her life times when there's family together and feelings are good and there's this happiness and joy, and you'll see, I've seen her sometimes in those settings just off somewhere looking in on it. And there's a certain smile that comes across her face that I wish I could see more often, because she's very deserving of that peaceful, joyful, kind of easy smile that says, all is right with the world. I feel good about things. It's a grand feeling. And I've learned to appreciate her for doing all she can to try to capture that feeling. She's made mistakes and she'll acknowledge it. I've made mistakes and I'll acknowledge it when that feeling has left us and we wanted it back. And sometimes it's hard to get back because the adversary jumps in and tries to stretch it out and exaggerate it, make it something that it isn't. But if it ever returns and I see that smile on her face, I know that, yeah, things are right. And I've kind of set as a goal for myself, having so much appreciation for her through now 56 years of marriage, that I want to create that smile just as often as I can create it, if there's something I can do that will help it. And I know it will give her that peace and see that smile on her face that doesn't come that often. That's what I want to do. This Christmas has been a little bit challenging because she's aware of a few problems that disturb her. When I say disturb, cause her concern, give her an element of sadness. And at Christmas time, it just doesn't seem to fit with everything that's going on. And Christmas season itself is a reminder that the life needs to be that way, not just a few hours. So I've gotten a little melancholy this time and gone on again, but those are my thoughts about Christmas and what makes it, how I spent part of the day today in the early morning hours out amongst town, different than I have done before. Some of the rewards that have come my way because of what I felt and acted upon. I've done enough of these now that when I have thoughts, I hear bells. So anyway, it works. And it's worth it. And once again, I love you and wish you what's left of a joyous season. Good night.